bless these words to our hearts. In the name of Jesus, amen. Reading this morning, John 13, 36 through 38. Simon Peter asked him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I am going, you cannot follow, not now, but you will follow later." Peter added, "Lord, why can't I follow you? I will lay down my life for you." And Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Continuing in John in 21, 1 through 14, and you'll recognize this as the Jesus' miraculous catch of fish. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not recognize it was Jesus. He called to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus had appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead.
The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We are thoroughly blessed today in that we have a guest. Well, we might call him Matt Zawisa, but you're going to know him as Peter here in a moment. So sit back and relax as Peter shares a compelling story with us this morning.
Excuse me. Does anybody happen to have any fish? Over here. It was a voice. It was a voice coming through the morning mist. We had just finished in a long night out in the sea, a long fishless night. "Do you happen to have any fish?" we heard, and there was someone on shore watching us. So we shouted back, "No." Kept working. Well, the voice comes back. "Well, why don't you try the right side of the boat and you'll catch some?" Really? So we all stared into the water as the net sunk down. And then all of a sudden, the surface of the water began to move. The net began to sink. I stood up, I looked ashore, I said, "Who is that?" And John said, "That? Well, that's the Lord." And yes, it was. And no, this was not my first miraculous catch with Jesus. In fact, yes, it did happen to me before. In fact, on these same very shores, 3 years ago. But I was a different man back then. Oh, yes, I was. People knew me as Simon the fisherman, not Peter the disciple, that's for sure. But everything changed when a certain carpenter walked into my life. Well, better yet, stepped into my boat 3 years earlier. So the local fishing fleet had just arrived from another long night out in the sea. The crowds were already filing in. The waterfront market within minutes is buzzing with activity. Fishermen sorting their catch, freshwater holding tanks with live fish, the local tax collector sizing up the day's haul, and everywhere you look already customers eager to purchase the freshest catch of the day. And it's only 6 a.m. Boy, I love this place. Friends, this is Capernaum, summer AD 27. Capernaum, as you might guess, is busy. So it would seem that Jesus has chosen the perfect place if he's looking for an audience, which indeed he is. But the problem is Capernaum's too busy. Nobody will be able to hear a word, but that doesn't concern Jesus because he's looking for one boat and one man in particular. Guess who? So he sees me, he sees us in the distance. My brother Andrew and I were washing and we're stretching out our nets, preparing for the next voyage. Had no idea that he stepped into my boat, but when I turned, there he was. Woo. And he was standing in my boat already. And when I asked him, what can I do for you? He just explained to me he would like me to go out into the water, just a bit offshore. Well, okay. Now, I had met Jesus before. The last thing I want to do is go back out in the water. But if he needed my help, so be it. So we went out just a little offshore, just far enough for him to be heard, and then he sat. He took the posture of a rabbi. It did not take long for those people to start coming one by one to listen, stop what they're doing, and listen to the man in the boat. You know, he always made the people feel closer to God, to a God that felt so far for so long. Well, anyways, after he finishes, he turns around, he looks out into the sea, and he says to me, "Why don't we go out? Let's go out into the deep water, and let's go catch some fish." I'm exhausted. I've been up for more than 24 hours. My back aches, my hands hurt. The last thing I want to do is go fishing. And worst of all, I have no fish to show for it, which means I get to go home to my wife empty-handed and my mother-in-law. Hold on, wait. Let's see here. Deep sea fishing with Jesus. Mother-in-law. What would you do? Be careful. So off we go. So when we get far enough out, I drop anchor, I lower the net in the water, and held it. I look over and I notice Jesus has his eyes closed, so I'm assuming he's praying. I hope for fish. Oh, I didn't have the heart to tell him this is a complete waste of... You know that net that I was holding in my hand? The one attached to the net, or the rope attached to the net? It began to slowly slide through my fingers, and I'm watching it saying, "That's interesting." And I look back to Jesus, and he smiles. And that's when this part of the story kind of becomes a blur. Because I remember screaming, first for my brother, "Andrew, get the other boat." Then our partners, John and James. I remember laughing. I remember crying at the exact same time. But then all of a sudden, I realized who was still in the boat with me. No mere man could do what he just did. Next thing I knew, I was on my knees. I dropped to my knees, just begging him to leave me. I wasn't worthy for this. I'm just a sinner. And he lowered himself to me. He looks into my eyes, and he says, "Don't be afraid, because from now on, you will catch men. You will be a fisher of men." So that was it. That's how it all happened. I was hooked, no pun intended. But that's how I became Jesus' first disciple. And others soon followed, and he chose and he picked until he had found his number. 12 of us. We were all from Galilee except one. He was from a town called Iscariot. He had a different accent than us. He was different too. And his name was Judas. So now Capernaum becomes our base of operations. Impressive choice by Jesus because news spreads quickly, especially exciting news. So it didn't take long for that crowd that morning to become a large, very large crowd. Hundreds grew into thousands. People of all ages, of all classes, it didn't matter. They wanted to hear the message. They wanted to see the miracles. And things were great. And then we heard the news about John the Baptist. John was a cousin of Jesus. And about a year earlier, he was thrown into prison by Herod. And we hadn't seen him since. Well, one day the news arrived that he was killed. And I'll never forget Jesus' response. He said, of all those born of women, there's none greater than John the Baptist. That was actually the first time I'd ever seen him sad. And he clearly needed something that we could not give him, and that was his father. So we watched him as he sailed away by himself to be alone. And we waited until mid-afternoon, and we went to go find him. Well, as we were approaching the other side, well, Jesus was there, yes, but so were thousands and thousands of other people. You know, I just shook my head because Jesus was good at everything except one thing: turning people down. But now we had a problem. We have a problem. We're in the middle of nowhere, and these people have nothing. Nothing. No food, nothing. We looked at our inventory, 5 loaves of bread and a couple small fish. We asked the Lord to send them away. He looks at us and says, well, they don't have to go away. Why don't we just feed them? Listen, I don't know about you, but 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish sounds like 5 really big sandwiches to me. Not a buffet for 5,000 people, plus. But he said, just bring them to me. So yes, you know the story. Yeah. We watched Jesus multiply the food over and over again. We all ate to our stomach's content, yes. But what you may not remember about are the leftovers. 12 large baskets of leftovers. 12 disciples, 12 baskets. The perk of being a disciple. So it was about 6 p.m. when we headed out. Jesus said he would stay behind, send the people away. We got into the boat, we left, and we had no idea what we were in store for that night. The Sea of Galilee, that's my home office, and I have weathered every storm, but not this one. It's a 45-minute typical trip across. At 9 hours, we were still lost. The storm was a beast. It came out of nowhere, and the more we fought, the more it just laughed and spit in our faces. And by 3 a.m., there was just one thing for sure. We are not going to get out of this one alive. We needed help, and the one person who might help us wasn't there. Or was he? Do not be afraid, it is I. We heard the voice of Jesus just breaking through the storm. And we looked out in the water, and you could see what looked like the figure of a man walking towards us. Is it a ghost or is it him? And I stood up, and I opened my mouth, and I said, wait, let me pause here for a second. I have a slight communication problem between my brain and my mouth. There seems to be a delay, which means speak first, think second. My friends, this would be a perfect example. Lord, if it is you, then command me to walk on the water. Seriously? That's the best I could have come up with in that moment. A leisurely stroll out in the middle of the killer storm. And when I turned around, I looked at the other disciples' faces. Yeah, Pete, you're on your own. Not one of my brightest moments. I looked over the edge of the boat. Wow, here goes nothing. So there I was. I'm standing on water, and I could see him through the darkness, but not clearly, so I needed to walk by faith, not by sight. And there was no way I was going to take my eyes off of him. No way. So I started walking. By the third step, it was pretty terrifying because I think reality checked back in. You're walking on water in a killer storm. There's a word for that, crazy. And that was the beginning of my downfall, or better yet, my sinking. As soon as I took my eyes off of him and back onto that storm, instantly, I was just swallowed by the sea, swallowed. And I did what every brave man would do in that situation. I cried out for help as loud as I could. And the next thing I knew was his hand reaches through the storm and he grabs me. And everything around me went quiet. My eyes locked into his eyes. And he said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt me?" I'm not sure why. I don't know. Well, anyways, after we stepped back into the boat, that storm that we had fought for 9 hours, it went silent, defeated, and we were absolutely terrified. Forget the storm. We were terrified of the guy that just defeated the storm. There was no doubt in our minds who this man was now. No doubt in our minds. This was God in the flesh. Now, what you may not know about this story is what I learned afterwards. Listen, after Jesus sent those people away, he went up on a mountaintop, he said, to pray. A mountaintop with a clear view of the Sea of Galilee. Which means that Jesus, he knew exactly where we were and what we were battling. It also means that he didn't take the storm away, but he prayed us through it. And when the time was right, he delivered us out of it and rescued us. And my friends, I'm pretty sure he works the same today. So, like I said, everything changed after that night. We knew who he was. There was no doubt in our minds. This was the Messiah, the Christ we have been waiting for. We were living in the times of the Messiah. I knew it. He proved it, and I was willing to give my life for it, I thought. And he asked me, are you really willing, Peter? And I said, yes, proudly. Yes, Lord, I am ready to die for you. But he said, before the rooster crows, on this night, Peter, you will deny even knowing me 3 times. He even told me hours before what I was about to do, which makes what I did that much worse. And it didn't happen spontaneously. I clearly laid the groundwork that night. I did. I am ashamed to say, but I did. It was about 1 a.m. when we entered the gates. He was being questioned inside by the high priest. So when John and we walked through the gates, John went first, I went second. Right away, the first challenge came. This servant girl challenging me with the question that you were with Jesus the Galilean. I froze in fear. That was completely unexpected. I looked at John, and I just remember saying that I don't know him. And I kept walking. Next thing, they had built a fire in the courtyard, and we were around the fire. I was getting uncomfortable, so I went out into the front porch, and again, another challenge comes. But this time I said, I don't know that man. I didn't even realize I said that. I just called my Lord that man. And I still had yet to remember what he told me. And about an hour passed, and that third challenge came. And they looked at me and they said, we know who you are. You are one of his, because even the way you speak gives you away. It was too late. I was caught and I was next. And I realized in that moment that I was not willing to die for that man. And I started cursing. I started swearing. I even pronounced death on myself if I was lying by the hand of God. And the rooster crowed. And this just broke. Because in that moment when I looked across the courtyard, Jesus turned and he looked into my eyes. And his eyes, they just penetrated my soul, bringing the light, the evil of my sin. And I stood there frozen, imagining myself running to him and pushing those soldiers out of the way and embracing him and saying, Lord, forgive me. I'm just a sinner. And telling the soldiers, take me instead, I'm the one. But I just stood there, frozen. And when he disappeared, I did too. And my anguish became unbearable. I started weeping like I never wept. It was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. For 3 days, I just completely disappeared into myself. The others knew what I did, but they knew what Judas did too. Do you think I was any better than Judas? Really? We both denied him. We both turned our back on him. I heard what Judas did. I never went to go see his body, but I was seriously considering doing the same. What choice do I have? But God had other plans. There was a knock on the door in the upper room. It was Sunday morning. I went to the door and I could hear a woman's voice. It was Mary. It was Mary Magdalene. I opened the door. Her face was frozen. I asked her, what is it? What's wrong? Her response nearly knocked me out. They took his body. First that, and now this. Now they took his body. I ran out the door. I have no idea what happened to me. I was running to the tomb. When I got there, John was there, and he was staring at what I was about to see. The boulder was rolled away in the middle of the night. And I looked inside the dark limestone cave, and I stepped in. When my eyes adjusted to the light, I looked and I noticed that everything was there, everything. The linens, the wrappings, even the headcloth. But there was no dead body. And I thought nobody took this body. It's as if he just vanished. No. No, that's impossible. That's impossible. And I looked at John, and I said, no, John, that's impossible because you saw him die. John buried him. He watched him take his last breath. What we needed to do was tell the others, and when we told them that night, some doubted, some believed, some wanted to believe. And my friends, that was me. I so badly wanted to believe. I know he raised Lazarus from the dead, and I know he raised Jairus, his daughter. I saw both of them. But how could he raise himself? My mind just began to race. I sat down on the ground, my back was to the door, and I started thinking about things that he said. And he was always talking about coming to Jerusalem, that I must suffer and die. He said, destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. In a little while, you will no longer see me. But a little while later, you will. The room became quiet. Suddenly, the room became quiet. Everybody was staring at something in the doorway. Someone in the doorway behind me. And I heard the greatest 4 words that I had ever heard. Peace be with you. When I turned and I looked into his eyes that first time, they were the same eyes that penetrated my soul that night in the courtyard. But there was no pain, no hurt, no sadness. Only victory. Boy, I didn't see that one coming. He appeared to us on 2 separate occasions that week. He appeared to the woman and even 500 people at once. And then he told us, he said, go ahead to Galilee and meet me at a certain mountain by the sea. We were just to wait. So we went. There were 7 of us. When we got there, we waited, and we continued to wait. And then I started getting bored. I don't know if you got this about me yet, but I'm kind of impatient. A little impulsive, too. I said, I'm going fishing. I'm going fishing. And they said that they would come too. I knew I was leading them into outright disobedience. I know. But I just figured that since I couldn't make it as a disciple, I might as well go back to this. But I was about to learn quickly the consequences of that disobedience. 0 fish all night long. And I was about to discover that this aspect of my life, it was over, Peter. And we heard the voice on the shore that morning, friends, do you happen to have any fish? And we shouted back, no. And he told us to try that right side, and we did. I looked up and I said, who is that man? And John said, that's the Lord. And then that mind problem thing, it took over again. Standing on the bow of the boat. And I took that just beautiful swan dive into the waters of grace. And what was waiting for me on shore was a loving Savior, eager to restore me. And restore me he did. Let me finish with this. But you see, Jesus wasn't finished with Peter just yet. Because this whole thing, this whole exchange between them had ended with a command. And it was a command that Peter would certainly obey. Follow me. Because the day it did arrive when Peter would not disown or disobey his Lord. And he was executed for it. But yet Peter still obeyed. You know, that morning on the beach between Jesus and Peter, that is just one of the great stories of brokenness restored, isn't it? When Jesus asked him, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" It was as if each piece, broken piece, was just getting put back into place. But Jesus was not finished with him yet, because Peter needed to know the cost of choosing this path to follow him. And that would be his life. And yet he still obeyed. How many of us could say the same, really? Peter knew what was ahead. He knew what was at stake if he chose to follow, to serve. And that would be his life. And he still said yes. I have a theory why. It's really quite simple, actually. When you see the face of God, like Peter, everything else fails in comparison, even death. So do you think God can say the same about you? Have you seen the face of God? It's not too hard to find, because he's the one that I've been telling you about all morning. He's the one who came to Peter when Peter needed him the most. He's the one who came to me when I needed him the most. And he's the one who now comes to you. His name is Jesus.